Today, we're going to be talking about chapters 17 and 18. And if you remember last time, I spoke about chapters 15, 16, and 17, which was a lot. And today will be a lot, but I hope to do it in such a way that it's accessible and of interest. So in dealing with chapters 17 and 18, my specific goal is to show the depth of these chapters and explain why they contain much more than seems to be there. So Donald Lopez, a great Buddhist scholar, in his book, Two Buddhas Seated Side by Side, which is a chapter-by-chapter guide to the Lotus Sutra, opens his commentary to chapter 17 as follows. Nothing of consequence in terms of plot occurs in the next 5 chapters, beginning with chapter 17. Each is devoted in one way or another to enumerating, often tediously, at least to the modern reader, the benefits of honoring the Lotus Sutra and the dangers of disparaging it. Now, I have great respect for Professor Lopez and understand that he is coming at it from a different angle than I'm coming at it from. I'm exploring the sutra as a Dharma teacher, and I wish to show the relevance the sutra has to Chan practice, all practice, to everything in daily life. So I hope to show some of the subtleties in these chapters and the great depth, which are definitely implied, but not stated so obviously. That's what makes the Lotus Sutra very tricky. Namely, these rewards and benefits and practices that are outlined are very nuanced, and the practices are at an extremely advanced level. And of course, some would argue there is no understanding higher than what you find in the Lotus Sutra. So first, let's get an overview of where we are so far and see what we've learned. In the first half of the sutra, we learned that the earlier teachings did not have the relevance that we thought they had. In fact, we, like the early practitioners that are portrayed in the sutra, didn't know there were alternative teachings. So the great arhats are gobsmacked, befuddled, flabbergasted, thunderstruck, and those adjectives are not hyperbole. Those are all understandable, because they thought that they had achieved nirvana and their journey was at end, but now they learn that it's an illusion. So I thought of a couple of metaphors that would bring this home to us, the listeners in the 21st century. So imagine if a group of people are discussing the 60s, and I know many people here weren't even born in the 60s, but I think everybody knows about the Beatles, hippies, marijuana, the Vietnam War, great societal changes. And just in the midst of this discussion, someone very innocently says, yes, and there was this terrible tragedy when President Nixon was assassinated. So you can imagine that the room would just grow silent. Maybe one person very nervously would say, don't you mean President Kennedy? Now, of course, this individual could say, oh, what was I thinking? A senior moment. Or they could just say, no, I'm pretty sure it was Nixon that was assassinated, you know, and Kennedy retired to Hyannisport, or whatever strange iteration he came up with. That's really crazy. Or imagine an English professor that has never heard of Shakespeare. Was that George Shakespeare, Fred Shakespeare, 18th century lyricist? I don't know. I never heard of him. Kind of impossible, like the border between California and Alabama. Very difficult to cross. And once again, this kind of hyperbole that I'm using is not far from things that happen in the sutra. And I'll be giving a variety of quotes from Dogen Zenji, and you'll see he's really out there as well. And I think in going through these earlier chapters, we talked about a lot of the famous parables of the burning house, and the wayward son, and the conjured city. I'm not going to go into those today, but so this revelation that they hadn't reached nirvana was too much for some of the practitioners, and the idea of the old teachings being superseded was appalling and unacceptable. And actually, in the sutra, in chapter 2, 5,000 monks, nuns, and lay people, men and women, walked out on the Buddha when he was about to reveal these new teachings, the new teachings that show the true, complete understanding. Now, actually, if you're worried about those 5,000 monks, nuns, and lay people, they actually come back in the Nirvana Sutra, and I think they finally accept the teachings. But this is what we have in the beginning of the Lotus Sutra. So we further learn that all the previous teachings have been replaced or enhanced or aligned with the one great vehicle. This is the apocalyptic new teaching. And I say apocalyptic because it is just now being revealed in the sutra. The Buddha is announcing that this is the first time that he's announced this one great vehicle. And as I've said in my earlier talks, this teaching is not expressible or conceivable, yet it's very real, truly real, and beyond the illusory world that most of us live in. The Buddha must use expedient means to convey these new teachings and insights to the great practitioners, arhats, and bodhisattvas, and to us. Expedient means are ways to communicate, point to, exhort, or explain the unexplainable. They reach us at a level that we can understand. And of course, it's understood in the Lotus Sutra that we all can understand this and practice it on some level. So, and then finally, in the first half of the sutra, much to our delight, we are told that we are all destined for Buddhahood, all sentient beings. So what more could we ask for? Well, as it turns out, the Buddha was not finished with us yet. The second half of the chapter, which I began in my last talk, beginning with chapters 15 and 16, drops a spiritual atomic bomb on us. In chapter 15, we encounter untold numbers of bodhisattvas that have been practicing deep within the earth. None of the arhats and bodhisattva that we've encountered already in the sutra even know who these bodhisattvas are. It's totally new to them. The Buddha announces that they are bodhisattvas that he has trained from time out of mind. And we'll get into some of these numbers very soon. So Maitreya does the math and realizes that the Buddha, who seems to be in his late 70s, could not possibly have trained these bodhisattvas for untold kalpas and eons. It would be like a 100-year-old man claiming a 25-year-old was his father. And that's actually an understatement in terms of the numbers. So now that we discover that the Buddha became a Buddha ages and ages ago. And speaking of the 60s, think of Jimi Hendrix, who wrote, "If a 6 turned out to be a 9, I don't mind." And so in the Lotus Sutra, the 6 does turn out to be a 9, and 9 is the 6, and neither one of them are numbers at all. Everything is really just thrown out the window. So what is more, we find that the whole Buddhist story, what we've all come to understand and learn so thoroughly about the Buddha as a prince who left the palace and studied with ascetics and eventually attained enlightenment, which is much more to it, but that's the story that we all know. But now we find out that he had become a Buddha innumerable millennia ago, and his passing into parinirvana, his death, was a ruse. I mean, he faked it in a way. So now we are in the second half of the Lotus Sutra, and the world has changed considerably. How big a deal is this? What do we believe? What do we discard? How are we to assess all of this? So the Buddha told us earlier that he had withheld some of his teachings, quite a lot, as it turns out. And now in the Lotus Sutra, he is revealing everything. So we find that the earlier teachings have not really lost their relevance. They are true up to a point, but the earlier ideal of personal liberation has been replaced by the ideal of the bodhisattva, a quest for everyone's liberation. And even this ideal may be understood differently because all beings have the Buddha potential within them, and everyone's a little different. So the word Buddha nature is not specifically used in the Lotus Sutra, but the teaching, the concept, the understanding, the reality of Buddha nature pervades the Lotus Sutra. There's an understanding more or less common to most Buddhist teachings, maybe all Buddhist schools, that you progress in a certain way in studying and traveling the path of the Dharma, from hearing the Dharma, considering or contemplating it, and then cultivating and practicing it, and finally completing the path. And completing the path, according to Lotus Sutra, is to reach Buddhahood. So now, in the investigation of chapters 17, which are about hearing, understanding, considering, and cultivation, actually, when you really look at them, I'm going to hone into a few topics which must be understood in depth to really understand the sutra. So I will be covering hearing, lifespan, time and space, trivial topics, right? Practice, especially through the paramitas, which are what are mentioned in chapter 17, and expedient means in chapter 18. So we'll see how we do. So let's just start with one of the iconic statements that you find in the sutra, and especially in these chapters. It's about simply hearing the sutra just for a moment. So in chapter 17, which is Fanbia Gungda, discrimination or distinction of merits, it says, still those good men and women who hear me describe my lifespan, right? This new announcement of his lifespan, and they believe it for even a moment, then there are amazing descriptions of the rewards of believing that, simply holding on to that understanding and seeing the ramifications. So in chapter 18, which is the merits of responding with joy, Sweishi Gunga, or appropriate joy, it's sometimes translated. It says, moreover, Ajita, that is Maitreya, suppose a person, for the sake of this sutra, visits a monk's quarters and sitting or standing, even for a moment, listens to it in acceptance. And the Buddha goes on and says, I will now describe his blessings, which we will hear later on. So let's start to break this down and look at one of the things that it's talked about, listening and hearing. So there's much more to hearing, much more to listening to sounds than just making a cognitive connection to the vibrations that come into your ear, and coming up with an understanding or an image. Hearing can be understood at a much more profound level. So in the Surangama Sutra, it introduces the practice of complete penetrative Dharma gate based on the faculty of hearing. This is Guan Yin, Avalokiteshvara. This is the method that he attained to realize the Buddha's wisdom and the essence of wondrous awakening. Of course, we, ordinary sentient beings, begin with our ordinary auditory faculties, but here we're going to look at a much deeper level. So here is Guan Yin speaking in the Surangama Sutra. I began with a practice based on the enlightened nature of hearing. First, I redirected my hearing inward in order to hear the current of the sages. Then external sounds disappeared. With the direction of my hearing reversed and with sounds stilled, both sounds and silence ceased to arise. So it was that, as I gradually progressed, what I heard what I heard and my awareness of what I heard came to an end. Even when that state of mind in which everything had come to an end disappeared, I did not rest. My awareness and the objects of my awareness were empty. And with that process of emptying, my awareness was wholly complete. Then even that emptying and what had been emptied vanished, coming into being and ceasing to be themselves ceased to be. Then the ultimate stillness was revealed. That is true hearing. And I'm suggesting that that kind of hearing lies within the sutra. So, and then just a follow-up, there's a quote from Master Sheng Yen, actually commenting on the Dharma Sutra and Guan Yin, and saying he turned his hearing back to listen to his own nature. So his nature attained the unsurpassed way. To turn the hearing back means to turn the light around and reflect within, and to investigate. If you investigate, you will discover an inconceivable state. And I cannot describe this state to you. If you want to taste its flavor, you have to work at your own practice. So just want to give some more dimensionality to hearing. So now let's look at the Buddha's lifespan and the concepts of time and space. They all move into one another. So the overarching theme in these two chapters, which was begun with a suggestion in chapter 15 and the revelation in chapter 16, that the Buddha has an incalculably long lifespan. So I'm going to look a little closer at this lifespan. Reading from Burton Watson's translation of the Lotus Sutra, I'm reading a whole section from the sutra to give you an idea of the kind of numbers and the, as I said, flabbergasting, gobsmacking kind of revelation that is in the sutra. Now, just so you know, there are two words that may be unfamiliar. One is asamkhya, which means uncountable in Sanskrit. And another word is nayuta, which I've seen glossed everywhere from 100,000 to 10 followed by 59 zeros. And if you use your hands and fingers to count that, you're going to be very frustrated. So from the sutra, suppose a person were to take 500, 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000, nayuta asamkhya, 1,000 millionfold worlds and grind them to dust. Then, moving eastward, each time he passes 500, 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000 nayuta asamkhya worlds, he drops a particle of dust. He continues eastward in this way until he has finished dropping all the particles. Good men, what is your opinion? Can the total number of these worlds be imagined or calculated? The Bodhisattva Maitreya and the others said to the Buddha, World Honored One, these worlds are immeasurable, boundless. One cannot calculate their number, nor does the mind have the power to encompass them. Even all the voice hearers and the Pratyeka Buddhas, with their wisdom free of outflows, could not imagine or understand how many there are. Although we abide in the stage of aviva vartika, which is non-backsliding, they are bodhisattvas, at least on the 8th bhumi, so they're very close to Buddhahood. So even we cannot comprehend such a matter. World Honored One, these worlds are immeasurable and boundless. At that time, the Buddha said to the multitude of great bodhisattvas, Good men, now I will state this to you clearly. Suppose all these worlds, whether they received the particle of dust or not, are once more reduced to dust. Let one particle represent one kalpa. The time that has passed since I attained Buddhahood surpasses this by 100, 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000 nayuta aisambyaka kalpas. Ever since then, I have been constantly in this saha world, right? The world of endurance, which is what saha means, the world of suffering. I'm preaching the Dharma, teaching and converting. And elsewhere, I have led and benefited living beings in hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, millions of nayutas and asamyakas of lands. So in all this time, which is, unimaginable to the nth degree, throughout the universe, the Buddha has been benefiting sentient beings. So if you could withstand that onslaught of numbers, you can see in almost all of the chapters in the Lotus Sutra are filled with unimaginable figures like these. One might be motivated to just, throw up your hands and say, it's impossible. I mean, I can't even conceive of it. And so how are we to understand these immense numbers? Well, for one thing, as the sutra says, we're not supposed to. They are inconceivable. And they are a sign of, evidence of, or a pointer to emptiness itself. And this is a very important way to understand these numbers. So even though our eyes and our minds can kind of glaze over when we're reading them, it's a very important understanding. So, and emptiness, which, voluminous study in itself, but it's the understanding of experience, or the experience of the conditionality, contingency, and impermanence of all things, that things are not what we think they are, as simply put as I can do. So this new understanding of the immensity of the Buddha's lifespan supersedes all our earlier understandings. And this revelation and the importance of belief and acceptance, this lays the foundation for much of what is to come in the rest of the sutra. Remember, this second half of the sutra is the origin, foundation part. The earlier part was called the trace. It was preparing us to come into this part of the sutra. And so this great lifespan radiates with the Buddha's great spiritual powers and compassion. To Dogen Zenji, the great Japanese Soto master from the 13th century, this lifespan is indicative of bodhicitta itself. That is true, compassionate, liberated mind. So a very important question comes up here. Well, why go through all this? Why not just say that the Buddha is eternal? So you don't have to go through all these numbers. This would be a cardinal error in the Buddha's teaching of the middle way. And this is not countermanded by the Lotus Sutra. That is an indication that there is an eternal, unchanging being is as much in error as the opposite view that everything is destined for destruction, that nothing lasts. And emptiness, the reality of how things actually are, as I mentioned, uninfluenced by our misconceptions, is not limited to any duality, eternal or nihilistic, long or short, good or bad, etc. Of course, in our world, our everyday world, where we ordinary sentient beings are now, that form, this world of form or desire or formlessness, the three realms, I never know who's listening to a talk. This is where we live, right? So we rely on these concepts to make our way and relate to other people and the world. The problem is not entirely whether such things are real or not real. The problem is our attachment to our perception of what we think is out there when it's really in here, not that there necessarily is a here. And we'll see, I'm going to have a long quote from the Lankavatara Sutra, and it couches this issue in terms of the projections of our minds, that we believe what our minds are projecting, not what is actually being presented to us in real time, if you will. So most famously, Zhi, the 6th century founder of Tiantai Buddhism, made the statement that one thought in 3,000 realms. And there's a formula, which I'm not going to go into how he came up with the 3,000 realms, but basically what it means is that one thought, one moment, which is a moment throughout time, right? And the 3,000 realms, which is all of the worlds, the 6 kinds of existences, and the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, Pratyeka Buddhas and Arhats, all those 10, and everything in it, in all of the attributes, all of those are beginningless and endless. And actually, Zhi once said that in even your most distracted thought, all the Buddhas of the 10 directions of the past, present, and future are present. So Dogen Zenji, in his Ehi Ko Rupu, very long work of his, And I'm indebted to Taigen Dan Layton's book, Visions of Awakening, for a lot of these quotes. He says, in the entire universe, in 10 directions, there is no Dharma at all that has not yet been expounded by all the Buddhas in the 3 times. Therefore, all Buddhas say, in the same manner that all Buddhas in the 3 times expound the Dharma, so now I also will expound the Dharma without differentiations. This great assembly present before me also is practicing the way in the manner of all Buddhas. Each movement, each stillness is not other than the Dharma of all Buddhas. So do not act carelessly or casually. Although this is the case, I have an expression that has not yet been expounded by any Buddha. Everyone, do you want to discern it? And after a pause, Dogen said, in the same manner that all Buddhas in the 3 times expound the Dharma, comma, so now I also will expound the Dharma without differentiations. You know, so things are transcendent, things are imminent, and none of the above. But everything is present. It's an eternal now. So thus, Dogen is showing the paradoxical nature of designating any lifespan for the Buddha. And it's important to understand all the different levels that the Lotus Sutra works on, this kind of transcendent and the more mundane. And you'll see, and if you read the sutra carefully, you'll see that even though he has announced that he is not going into extinction, or he did not go through parinirvana, still many times throughout the sutra, he talks about people practicing after his extinction. So whereas it seems like a contradiction, it's actually an expedient means to reach sentient beings according to their understanding. Dogen notes that the lifespan is none other than that which prompted the Buddhas to achieve spiritual insight in the earlier chapters, and is none other than the ultimate effect. And what he's referring to as sometimes the first half of the sutra is called the cause, and the second half, which we're in now, is called the effect. So Dogen further clarifies that space is not an empty container. So we're morphing from time and into space, which you'll see. So Dogen further clarifies this, and he says the absence of forms, not the air between things, rather spaces and things themselves, as just elaborated in one of his talks, the wholehearted practice of the way, where grasses and trees and fences and walls, tiles and pebbles, all things in the Dharma realm, in the universe, in the 10 directions, are exactly space. And he actually quotes 2 Chan masters who are one asking the other about how he understands space, and one goes like this with his hand and says, well, this is how I understand space, right? It's right here. And his brother grabs his nose and tweaks it until he cries out in pain and says to him, now you understand what space is. The brother was overlooking, and as many of these stories go, had a great moment of enlightenment. And Dogen also uses the story of the Buddha's lifespan to support his often expressed view of the purity of practice realization. Dogen said that practice is enlightenment. And this is very much in keeping with the Lotus Sutra, and he was greatly influenced by it. And you'll see in some of the other quotes that I have that his incredible imagination, elaboration, really makes sense in the context of the Lotus Sutra. And as a matter of fact, this ruse, as I talked about, of the Buddha's extinction, Dogen likens this to a move in Go, in chess, like the Buddha as a great Go or chess master, and sort of figuring out how to help sentient beings. I think that's a great image. So he says that, and he says the sutra is the whole body of the Tathagata. The mark of reality of all things in the present time is the sutra. And in famous essay of Dogen's, Being Time, Fuji, he says people only see times coming and going and do not thoroughly understand that the time being abides in each moment. Closely examine this flowing. Without your complete effort right now, nothing would be actualized. Nothing would flow. Time is not some external, objective, independent entity, but requires a practitioner's complete effort. And then he said, mountains are time, oceans are time. If there were not time, there would be no mountains or oceans. Do not think that mountains and oceans here and now are not time. If time is annihilated, mountains and oceans are annihilated. And I just want to read a rather remarkable passage from one of Dogen's Jodos. And Jodo is a Dharma Hall discourse. And this is just I'm presenting this as an example of, a mind that is not hindered by anything. So it goes like this. Today, this mountain monk, Dogen, gives a Dharma Hall discourse for the assembly. What I have just said, I offer to all the 3 treasures in the 10 directions, to the 28 ancestors in India, to the 6 ancestors in China, to all the nostrils under heaven, to the eyeballs throughout the past and present, to dried shit sticks, to 3 pounds of sesame, to Zen boards, and to zafus. Previously, we offered incense for the limitless, excellent causal conditions, and we dedicated so that toads may leap up to Brahma's heaven, earthworms may traverse the Eastern Ocean, and clouds and water monks may become horses and cows. All Buddhas of the 10 directions in the 3 times, all honored one, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, mahaprajna paramita. It's hard to top that as a Dharma discourse. Now, well, I'm going to do a slight divergence here, which I think is very germane, very relevant to what I'm talking about. And I'm going to make a comparison between the Lotus Sutra and the Heart Sutra. And I'm doing this for the reason of showing the depth of the Lotus Sutra, which can be somewhat elusive, right? And, unless you really read it carefully, go back, contemplate it, and do all the things that the Lotus Sutra says. And remember, as I've said in earlier talks, the Lotus Sutra that the Lotus Sutra is actually talking about, I know that sounds funny, but is the Li, the non-expressible part of the Lotus Sutra, which quite miraculously is expressed. The Lotus Sutra is expressing the inexpressible. And just remember that section I just read from the Lotus Sutra, that's longer than the entire Heart Sutra, which is only, I think, 256 or so Chinese characters. So where's the comparison between these very little and this enormous, right? Both of these sutras take the earlier teachings apart, concept by concept, teaching by teaching, to the point where there seems to be that nothing is left. Of course, what is left is an entire universe, all Dharma Dhatu in plain sight, if you will. So it's easy to see the deconstruction in the Heart Sutra. All the foundational teachings, from the 4 Noble Truths to the 12 links of dependent origination, are disassembled, taken apart, or they seem to be at the first reading. Likewise, the Lotus Sutra seems to make a blanket de-authentication, disaffirmation of the earlier teachings, of the entire Pali canon, or so it seems on a cursory reading. You can make mistakes or just get a superficial reading of the Heart Sutra because it is so dense. And you can make mistakes or just get a superficial reading of the Lotus Sutra because it is so vast. So the Heart Sutra seems to say, for example, that the 4 Noble Truths are invalid, don't even exist. It says there's no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cessation of suffering, and no path. On the one hand, you can't do a better job of erasing something out of existence by negating every single assertion, entire Four Noble Truths. But that's a superficial reading, especially since it says form is not other than emptiness and emptiness is not other than form. So what is may not be, and what may be actually may not be, or vice versa. The relative conventional rug has been pulled out from under us in the Heart Sutra. So now if you look at the Heart Sutra from the point of view of the Lotus Sutra, then, well, there certainly is suffering, a cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and a path. The Lotus doesn't actually negate that in a nihilistic way. So it depends on where we are on our path, with our practice. And at the end, with a firm understanding of emptiness, if such a thing were possible, maybe we can only have a squishy understanding of emptiness, then as a bodhisattva, you need the Four Noble Truths, no longer for your own liberation, but for that of others. Now, the Lotus Sutra negates and confirms the Four Noble Truths simultaneously, it seems. And it's not a contradiction. Some people need these teachers, others are beyond them. Even in the Pali Canon, the Raft Sutra explains that there's no need to grasp the teachings once you have crossed to the other shore. And the Lotus and the Heart Sutra might argue that this is the other shore and vice versa, or there's no shore at all. I mean, when it's so tempting to get caught up in concepts, but we're really in a level where we're beyond that. So I'm bringing this up so we can look beyond that seeming superficiality or the tedium that Professor Lopez mentioned in chapters 17 and 18 and 3 following chapters. What the Lotus Sutra is just reneging and validating in every direction. It's also pulling the rug from under us. So in these chapters, the seeming simplicity of just hearing, even for a moment, and accepting and believing as a kind of free ticket for Dharma bliss and the heavenly realms with no effort, that's misleading. It's not just a free ticket. Indeed, the sutra is showing a way to bypass mundane superficialities and not be diverted in the journey to reach Buddhahood. Like the burning house parable, it's an example of expedient means. Which reminds me of a joke, which has an individual talking to God. And he says to God, "Is it true that for you a moment is like 1,000,000 years?" And God says, "Yes, that's true." And then the man says, "Is it true for you that a penny is like $1,000,000? And God says, "Yes, that's true." And the man says to God, "Well, then could you give me $1,000,000? And the God says, "Sure, wait a moment." Right? So caught in this relativity in our understanding between the immanent and the transcendent. So now we're getting into the process of cultivating. Let's see how I'm not bad. Okay. So in Talk on the Wholehearted Engagement of the Way, Bendoa, Dogen directly emphasizes the actualization of practice over doctrinal theory. You'd think that some of these great masters would be caught up in the sutras or whatever, but no, they're only pointing a direction for actual practice and reality. So Dogen said, Buddhist practitioners should know not to argue about the superiority or inferiority of teachings and not to discriminate between superficial or profound dharma, but should only know whether the practice is genuine or false. We've looked deeper at these levels of hearing and time and space and what they are or aren't. So let's go and look into the actual practice that is described in chapters, especially chapter 17, is where I'm going to concentrate now. So chapter 17, in describing the benefits that one gets from hearing and believing the sutra, goes into great grandiloquence and magnificent terms about all of the benefits, and does this kind of what I call a spiritual leveraging about, if you think this is good, well, then imagine if you did this, it's so much greater. So just hearing and accepting the sutra is wonderful, but if you accepted and read and recited it and copied it and taught it to other people, then the benefits are so much greater. So in chapter 17, the Buddha is talking about the 6 paramitas. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with them, but just as a quick recap, they're very much like the basic 3 teachings in Buddhism of moral cultivation, all the 5 precepts of not killing, stealing, telling lies, sexual misconduct, and taking intoxicants. So you have a stable physical, mental life, and then continuing your look inward, developing your ability of concentration with the teaching of samadhi, and then finally developing wisdom. So in the 6 paramitas, that's divided into charity or generosity, moral conduct or discipline. Those are the shila, the moral part. And then there is patience and perseverance, sometimes called forbearance and vigor. And finally, the meditation, samadhi, dhyana, and wisdom. So the 6 paramitas are really very much in keeping with all Buddhist teachings. The difference is that these are bodhisattva practices. And once again, the practices are designed for your benefit, but your benefit without us, as you transcend the need for your self-concern, and especially for the benefit of all other beings, including yourself. So here now from chapter 17, the Buddha is addressing Maitreya, who at this point is a monk named Ajita. So Ajita, when I described how the lifespan of the thus come one lasts for such an exceedingly long time, living beings as numerous as the sands of 10,000 million Nayutas of Ganges attained the truth of birthlessness. Right? At that time, the Buddha said to the Bodhisattva and Mahasattva Maitreya, if there are living beings who, on hearing that the lifespan of the Buddha is of such long duration and are able to believe and understand it, even for a moment, remember how important that moment is, the benefits they gain thereby will be without limit or measure. And remember how important the hearing is. Suppose there are good men or good women who, for the sake of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, in other words, highest perfect enlightenment, over a period of 800,000 million Nayutas of kalpas, practice the 5 paramitas, the paramita of dana, almsgiving, of shila, keeping of the precepts, kashanti, forbearance or patience, as I mentioned, virya, assiduousness, or perseverance or vigor, and dhyana, which is meditation, and the paramita of prajna, of wisdom, being omitted, which I'll get to in a moment. The benefits they obtain will not measure up to even 100th part, 1,000th part, 100,000, 10,000, millionth part of the benefits mentioned previously. So the Buddha is saying that even the practice, these great practices of the paramitas, pale before an acceptance and a belief and a practice to follow in the Lotus Sutra. The Buddha says, indeed, it is beyond the power of calculation, simile, or parable to convey the comparison. So for good men who have gained such benefits as those mentioned previously, to fall back without reaching the goal of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi is utterly unimaginable. So the Buddha once again has dropped another bombshell in another way. And there's a follow-up to the acceptance of the Lotus Sutra, the hearing and acceptance. So they win blessings that surpass imagination. And if they accept the sutra, they say, our wish is that in future ages we may use our long lives to save sentient beings. Just as today the world honored one, king of the Shakyas, roars like a lion in the place of practice, preaching the Dharma without fear, so we may too in ages to come, honored and revered by all, when we sit in the place of practice, describe our lifespan in the same manner. So everyone is getting on board with the Buddha. All the arhats, the bodhisattvas, everyone is understanding this and accepting it. And there is another part, actually, we'll see this in chapter 18, but I'll mention it now, where throughout the Lotus Sutra, it's talked about building stupas in various ways, magnificent stupas. Sometimes they don't have to be so magnificent, but they represent the Buddha, the Buddha's teachings, the continuation of the Buddha. Very important in many schools of Buddhism, not so much in Chan. But later in chapter 18, the Buddha is saying, because you've accepted this sutra, you've already built your stupas. So, but as I said, he says things on different levels. So here he's saying, in the place where such a person resides, in other words, a person who has accepted and is now teaching and trying to pass on the sutra, where he walks, sits or lies down, or recites even one verse of a scripture, there you should erect a stupa as if to a Buddha, adorned in a fitting and wonderful manner, and offer alms of various kinds to it. When a son of the Buddha dwells in such places, the Buddha will accept and utilize them, and constantly in their midst we will walk, sit, or lie down. So now, as promised, I told you how the Buddha, interestingly enough, left out the paramita of wisdom. And I'll address this now. I'm going to read the 80th chapter from the Lankavatara. It's not that long, but this is a magnificent teaching on the 6 paramitas and is very, very relevant to understanding the Lotus Sutra. So the interlocutor, like it's Maitreya and sometimes in the Lotus Sutra, is a bodhisattva named Mahamati in the Lankavatara. So Mahamati once more asked the Buddha, Bhagavan, according to what the Bhagavan has said, by carrying out the 6 paramitas, one attains enlightenment. But how are they carried out? So we're talking about all 6 right here. And the Buddha told Mahamati, there are 3 different kinds of paramitas. So there's one for ordinary people, one for Shravakas and Prateka Buddhas, and one kind for bodhisattvas. And these are classified as mundane, metaphysical, and transcendent. And what I'm going to argue is that this kind of understanding, this depth of what the paramitas mean and how they can be understood in practice really is within this chapter of the Lotus Sutra. It's just not very apparent. So let me continue. Mahamati, as for the metaphysical, mundane paramitas, because those who are attached to a self and what belongs to a self cling to dualities, they carry out the paramita of charity in order to enjoy the form, sound, smell, taste, and touch of other states of existence. And they do the same in regard to morality, forbearance, vigor, meditation, and wisdom for the sake of worldly powers or rebirth in the heavens of Brahma. So even though these paramitas are transcendent practices, it would seem, beginning, and this seems to be a very human thing, it's really, we're in it for ourselves. Even though we may not exactly acknowledge that, we're still caught up in a dualistic world, still clinging to the things we like, to the things we order from Amazon, we watch on Netflix, those of us who are trying to do the 6 paramitas. still wonderful practices, but haven't quite been embraced. So, and then if you move on from that, then the Buddha says, Mahamati, as for the metaphysical paramitas, because Shravakas and Prateka Buddhas become attached to nirvana, and I think we can too, they practice the 6 paramitas in order to enjoy the bliss of nirvana for themselves. So there's a much subtler level of greed here, a much subtler level of attachment. So Mahamati, as for the transcendent paramitas, because those who realize that the projection to which they are attached are nothing but the perception of their own mind, and that their own mind is thereby divided, they do not give rise to projection or become attached to other states of existence. And I think this is worth reading too. So this is the Buddha actually goes over a transcendent understanding of the 6 paramitas. Not letting their mind become attached to material appearance, they engage in the transcendent practice of the paramita of charity for the happiness of all beings, not giving rise to restrictions regarding the projecting of objective conditions. This is the paramita of morality, not giving rise to the projection of patience while knowing what grasped and what is grasped. This is the paramita of forbearance, not giving rise to the projection of practice while practicing with zeal during the 3 periods of the night. This is the paramita of vigor, not becoming attached to the nirvana of Shravakas when projections cease. This is the paramita of meditation, and examining the non-existence of the projection of one's mind with insight without falling into dualities and transforming one's karmic body into an indestructible one, in other words, the Dharmakaya, and reaching the realm of personal realization of Buddha knowledge. This is the paramita of wisdom. So the Lankavatara is always talking about self-transformation, zhezheng in Chinese, and actually that is what the lotus is talking about, and is showing it, as I often say, rather than expressing it in detail. So the Buddha's kind of saying, it seems to me, in the Lotus Sutra, that the practice of the bodhisattvas who are doing the 5 paramitas is a great practice, even if they are saving people and creating arhats, but they're still lacking this last paramita of wisdom. So on a very, very rarefied level, I guess you could say, they're still on the metaphysical approach to the paramitas. They haven't quite reached the transcendent. And of course, the sutra is noting that many of us are really on the mundane level. And the sutra is speaking to people at all levels, although it's not exactly a beginner sutra, right? Although I think it can be taught that way, but you really needs a lot of background. So, and the important thing about the paramitas is that they mitigate and against the kleshas, the afflictive states, the poison. So greed is overcome by vigor or perseverance, desire by forbearance, anger by charity as compassion, conceit by morality, and ignorance by both meditation and wisdom. So, and eventually what this is leading to is this understanding, experience of emptiness, of wishlessness, formlessness, so that the kleshas no longer can arise at this point. And so this is like, as a friend of mine says, there's no ground from which attachments arise because there's nothing there. And as you can't grow a tomato with no soil, simply put. And we're doing all right. So now I'm amazed I was able to get through this. So I want to make a point about chapter 18 and just give you a little idea of what's there and why this is also relevant. So chapter 18 is very much like chapter 17 with the added component of joy. So not only are you hearing and believing and accepting the sutra, but the sutra actually makes a certain kind of joy arise within you from just hearing it. This idea that you are destined for Buddhahood, all of the things that you might intuit. And remember, we're looking at, even though this might sound like a moment, this is really a very all-encompassing kind of moment. So the Buddha says that, I'm sorry. So in chapter 18, so I'm getting to chapter 18. So let me read this, and you'll see what I mean. So here we are in chapter 18, and the Buddha says, Ajita, suppose there is a person who speaks to another person saying, there is a sutta called the Lotus. Let's go together and listen to it. And suppose, having been urged, the other person goes and even for an instant, there it is again, listens to the sutra. The benefits of the first person will be such that when he is reborn, he will be born in the same place as Dharani bodhisattvas, great bodhisattvas. He will have keen faculties and wisdom. For 100, 1,000, 10,000 ages, he will never be struck dumb. His mouth will not emit a foul odor. Really in the sutra. His tongue will never be afflicted, nor will his mouth be afflicted. His teeth will not be stained or black, nor will they be yellow or widely spaced, nor will they be missing or fall out or be at an angle or crooked. His lips will not droop down or curl back or be rough or chapped or afflicted with sores or misshapen or twisted or too thick or too big or black or discolored or an unsightly way. His nose will not be too broad or flat or crooked or too highly arched. His face will not be sallow, will not be long and narrow, sunken, distorted. He will not have a single unsightly feature. His lips, tongue, and teeth will be all handsomely proportioned. His nose will be long and high, his face round and full, his eyebrows long and set high, his forehead broad, smooth, and well-shaped. And he will be endowed with all the features proper to a human being. In each existence he is born, he will see the Buddha, hear his law, and have faith in his teachings. So, what is going on here? You know, I was thinking about this, and if this were written in contemporary times, could you imagine? The sutra might say, well, if you study this, you will have a six-pack abs. You will have beautiful flowing tresses. You'll have low cholesterol, and you will and all your triglyceride numbers will be fine, right? So it's important to understand. It's important to understand that this is sorry. It's important to understand that this is not talking about superficial, cosmetic kinds of things. So, I'm sorry, one second, sorry. Anyway, what this is really an example of expedient means. So what we have here is a kind of bribe, if you will. It's anyone who is at a particular level is not going to care about what their physical appearance is, and indeed the sutra is talking. Remember, this is 2,000 years ago, perhaps, when the roots of the sutra are actually first coming to being, maybe even longer than 2,000 years ago. And what people were thinking about was vitality, their health, their ability to not be sick, because I can't imagine what the lifespan was back in those times. So this is another part of the expedient means, another kind of angle into the sutra. Many different ways. So the sutra is appealing on so many different levels. So what I'd like to do is sum up some of what we've spoken about. I really wanted to emphasize the depth of these two sutras, which seem to be, the two chapters in the Lotus, the chapters 17 and 18, they seem to be kind of giving a very simple path to Buddhahood with just really a very superficial understanding. But if you really look into some of the things that I think I've brought out, the moment, what that might mean, what hearing might mean, what the practice is about, really how it can be approached in so many different levels according to where we are. So to show that the Lotus Sutra is really this all-encompassing path, all-encompassing teaching. As Dogen might say, it is the body of the Tathagata himself. And what my intention is, of course, in giving these talks, is to really, just like the Lotus Sutra says, to encourage, suggest, exhort you to look at the sutra further, to see that even though when you're first reading it, there's a bunch of parables, a bunch of stories. It's hard to see how they hang together. But when you really, really start to study the sutra and you really look deeply into it, you see this underlying, non-interrupted teaching that is, timeless and boundless. So I actually did this in an hour. I'm astonished. So let me just do the closing of the liturgy for the sutra. May the virtuous merits adorn and purify the Pure Land of the Buddhas. Upwardly, we repay the 4 layers of gratitude. Downwardly, we alleviate the suffering of the 3 destinies. May those who see and hear the Dharma generate Bodhi mind, exhausting this body of retribution. May we be reborn in the land of extreme bliss. So thank you all. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. So,
thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you so much for all of your talks given in November. And as I understand, this is your last talk in November, right?
Yes, this is the last one. I hope to be giving some next year. I haven't quite gotten the dates yet, but so probably be able to finish the sutra if the end of next year, early the following year, I'm not sure, but it's a continuing journey, which is really yielding a lot of fruits, I find. Really rather remarkable course of study.
Yes, absolutely. And you've already covered a lot of ground, and we look forward to the future talks in the Lotus Sutra. It is definitely a big and dense sutra that worth taking a longer journey.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
All right.
And so, yeah, since it's the last talk, so even though we a little bit over time, we still want to open up for Q&A, just to see if anyone have questions. Just quickly ask before we meet Harry for next year. The Sunday Dharma talks will continue in December. We'll still have Dharma talks in December, but it'll be a different topic. Okay, great. Seems
Okay.
people are
All
just
right.
still pondering, thinking
Well,
over
you know,
all the
sometimes it
talks.
takes people, it takes a while, right? Some people may still be trying to
Yeah, if
do
you
the
have questions, you
calculation.
can feel free to raise your hand. Okay.
All right.
Seems
Well,
no
that's fine.
one has questions, and if you do, you always feel free
Yeah.
to leave a note.
Yeah, please, yes. So I really want to thank everybody once again for coming and hearing and sharing the Dharma. It's really, as I said, such a blessing and reward to be with you all. So I wish you a very happy Sunday and a very happy ride on the path of Dharma.